Brian Turner with CCS here. Today we're talking with Alan Kampschnieder. He's the Vice President of Client Services for Nutrient Advisors. Last time we were together, Alan, we talked about EQIP and EQIP funding. Like we discussed, there's a lot more to go there. But part of the process, though, when you're looking at putting a barn or building, or frankly any piece of or any structure on your property, we have the dreaded zoning. So I've thought a lot about that. And my first question is, I'm out in the middle of the country, middle of nowhere. I don't have neighbors for miles. Why do I even have to concern myself with zoning? Can't I just put my building on any piece of my land that I want?
Unfortunately, no. I guess there is a lot of variability in county zoning. Some counties don't even have zoning. So there you absolutely could go put your building on your piece of ground and call it good. Most counties in Nebraska do have zoning, and setbacks from neighbors and setbacks from the center of the road and setbacks from wells and cemeteries. There's a lot to take into account when it comes to county zoning.
So when we talk about, is there a difference between zoning and setbacks?
Well, setbacks are part of the zoning process.
Okay.
Setbacks from neighbors, setbacks from each county would be different as far as a distance setback. Most counties are 3/8 or a half or a mile, depending on the size of the operation.
Okay. So does it depend on if I'm going to put in a livestock building or a commodity building or maybe a machine shed? Will those affect my zoning depending upon the county, assuming the county has the zoning and zoning rules and regulations?
There are specific regs for each type of building, a machine shed or a bin. Livestock buildings are most of the issue, I guess, as far as setbacks, like from neighbors and stuff.
Okay.
Buildings is like machine sheds, typically not a lot of setbacks. From the center of the road, yes. From neighbors, not so much.
Is that because of what you're doing with the building? Does that have some? So I'm assuming that if I'm building a livestock building and I'm looking at zoning and setbacks, because it has livestock, that's going to have different rules or different zoning rules as compared if I'm putting up a machine shed. Nobody's worried about that, the appearance or the smell. I guess that's where we're going with that, right?
Yep, okay. Absolutely. Most counties have specific regs for livestock feeding operations. It's
Okay.
A conditional use permit is typically required in most counties.
Okay.
So that's, depending on the size, that's an application. You might have to go through a public hearing process, and stuff like that. So.
Wow. So, but every county, and I'm assuming now you guys work in multiple states, we work in multiple states, but it's really at a county level that the zoning really is determined, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. At the local control, yeah.
Local
at the county level, the zoning is required, and it does vary by state.
Does it?
It
Okay.
does. It does.
Okay. So what I've heard, though, since we've been doing some of this, there are counties that have a lot of zoning, and then the very next county would have virtually no zoning rules or regulations, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow, that's it's a little strange, isn't
It
it?
is. It is.
It becomes tough then as you think about the layout of your operation. You in the future you're looking at your property, you're looking at your layout, and many times a landowner could have property in different counties, so that could determine what you may want to do with your property depending upon what the zoning regs are in the county. Mm-hmm. So if I were to do that, what are some tips or that you can offer as I'm taking a look at? So I've gone through the process, I'm decided that I want to get into livestock or maybe even build a big machine shed or an office of some kind. As I start looking at zoning, let's talk about two things. First of all, what's a good tip as I'm looking at my property as a whole? Any tips that you can bring to the party that says, okay, here's really what you need to consider?
The first thing I always consider is neighbors,
Okay.
and relationships with neighbors. Most people know or have a good idea on how neighbors feel about livestock.
Okay.
And that's our area of expertise is livestock and livestock buildings. So the machine sheds we don't get too much into, but neighbors is number one. Like I said, there's a setback for different counties have different setbacks to livestock feeding operations. So that's number one. Number two is how's this going to work in your operation? Some guys have a feed floor and feed, commodity shed all set up. How far are you willing to drive to feed those critters?
That's a good thought.
I mean, it's just, and then you do take into account, how the building lays, wind direction, snow, how that's going to affect the cattle inside or any kind of livestock. But there's a lot of factors to consider, and usually I like to go out and look at the site for myself and just discuss with the producer, here's what you got to look forward to, here's maybe my concerns.
That's so. We're really what we're talking about is when you take a look at it is best practices. Even in the ag industry, when we look at best practices, when you said, hey, how far do you want to haul the feed or do anything, right? Because there's daily maintenance. So you can help, and you can probably take from your background and say, hey, I was at this operation or is that operation. Here's how we see flow. We were talking earlier about getting trucks in and out of properties. Sometimes that's very hard to do, and depending upon the weather conditions, now this year wasn't bad, but last year's you have so much snow. Where do you push the snow, and how do you get it? And how do you make sure you can get the vehicles, tractors, trucks, trailers, etc., in and out? Yeah. So you can help the landowner take a look at that, and probably even make a recommendation, I assume.
Absolutely.
Because when we took a look at prevailing winds, so if I'm putting up a cattle facility, the winds are very well, and even a hog facility, the winds are important, so that way we can keep the animals at the temperature that they need to be based on using the prevailing winds. Mm-hmm. And I assume that we have to take a look at then tree lines and all of those types of things.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if I wanted to do that, so I've gotten to that point now, I've already decided I'm going to build a building. And I want, let's just use cattle as an example. Mm-hmm. What do I need to come to you with? So let's say I'm going to engage your company, Nutrient Advisors. Do I need to bring something to you, or should I go to the county first to figure out some of this stuff, or what's your thoughts there?
Your first stop should be Nutrient Advisors. We will absolutely go through that whole process of the county application, the hearing if need be. We are a lot of times the lead at that county meeting, kind of describing the project and this is what's going to happen. Here's the reasons. It meets all the county setbacks. It meets the regs. Here's why we should approve this project. A lot of the times we're the lead on those type of meetings. Okay. So,
well, I'm glad to hear that you'd go to the county meetings. I've been to a few. We know that they can get emotional, especially if we talk about neighbors. They can get we all like to think we live very, very well together, but sometimes we get an ornery one here or there, and I assume you can take the emotion out of it when I may want to jump up and down and say, by gosh, why aren't you approving this permit, right?
Yep, absolutely. We pride ourselves in being third party. We try and take the emotion out of it and look at facts. The fact is that they do meet the requirements to get this conditional use permit.
So it's hard to argue with the facts. You can always argue with emotion, right?
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, that's good. So as we continue down the path, now we've got the zoning taken care of. And I wanted to ask you one thing, though. As we take a look at zoning and we take a look at how the property's laid out, we also want to consider future expansion. As we decide to put buildings on properties, I assume you're asking the question, well, what do you want to do next year or 5 years? Because that should affect, ground is only so large, right? And it depends upon how you want your buildings laid out. What will they look like in the future?
Yep, absolutely. They're definitely not making any more land. So if we always try and talk future expansion, whether it be another livestock barn or more open lot pens, or grain bin. I mean, we're always looking at how trucks can get in, trucks can come out. Feed is always a big deal. Feed alleys. How are you going to get the cattle to the working facility? We're always looking at that sort of stuff. Yeah. So.
Excellent. Well, that's good. So that gives us just some more insight into the into going down this path. So tell us a little bit more about Nutrient Advisors.
Nutrient Advisors is a full-service compliance record-keeping and nutrient management company. We've been in business 15 years. and we sure take pride in our common sense approach and doing it right for the producer. So if you need to contact us, our office is in West Point, Nebraska. Phone number there is 402-372-2236, or look us up at nutrientadvisors.com.
Excellent. Thanks, Alan.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Brian.